Three of the past rabbis of Ohev Sholom were available for interviews. Rabbi Danny Horowitz lives in Houston, Texas. We held our interview with him on Zoom on June 13th, 2023. In the video, you will hear Rabbi Danny reflect on his 18 years as a rabbi from 1986 to 2004. He remembers his congregants well and reflects that Ohev members were particularly open to adding ritual that he introduced. He also recalls the expansion of Shabbat morning kiddushes and sees that as important in building community. He talks about the birth of the Cafe Ohev program as an outgrowth of the Scholar in Residence weekend, which was always so well attended. Rabbi Horowitz concludes with philosophical thoughts about the conservative movement.
Yeah. Well, what I have here is that you started at Ohev as the rabbi in 1986.
That's correct.
So that was a year before I came. So relying on what others told me, one of the most significant occurrences was in 1986 that Ohev became egalitarian and affiliated with United Synagogue.
Well, it affiliated with United Synagogue before I was there.
Okay.
Because I would not have known about the option of coming to Ohev Sholom if they hadn't joined United Synagogue. And I think that was one of the things that pushed the congregation leadership into conservative movement. Joel, you were probably there for those discussions, but they wouldn't have been on the rabbinical assembly list if they hadn't been members of the Senate, at least not at that time of year. I think they wouldn't have opened it up to RA members until June. So, and I'll tell you that I was offered 2 jobs on the same day. And I chose Ohev. I was offered the position that Alan Cohen was leaving in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay? Rabbi Cohen was leaving. That's actually where I met him when I interviewed in Charleston. Okay? Charleston was a fine congregation, and certainly it was a little more stable than Ohev Sholom was in that time. But it just wasn't a great community. It was not the place that we wanted to raise Jewish kids. If we could have gone there, we would have probably left after a few years. And that's why Rabbi Cohen was leaving, because his kids were, getting past the, the age that they could go to day school. So I picked Ohev Sholom. And I've never been sorry. Well, maybe there were days, but
overall, you would say overall.
What I tell people is that I was in Kansas City for 18 years, and they were 16 of the happiest years of my life.
Okay. And the other 2 years?
That's not bad.
Okay.
Hey, the other 2 years I've just, blocked out. So,
okay. Well, I was recalling so many things that happened through your leadership, and I'm just going to name a few. And then I thought maybe you could talk about some things that meant a lot to you. But we received the Shaw Endowment, which made a big difference in our life.
Oh yeah.
And that happened, I think, in 1988. But
I think it was later.
Later?
I think it was when Stefan was president. So it was more like 91 or 92.
Okay.
It was either when Stefan was president or when Ace became president, but it was right around that time.
Okay.
You mentioned the whole business with becoming egalitarian.
Yeah.
To me, it was obvious that the congregation was going to do that. The question was, could we avoid any unnecessary rancor over it? We lost 2 members, and neither of them got real hostile about it. It was just, they accepted that they weren't going to be comfortable with it. One of them went to KI, one of them went to BOV. It was fine. And, I wrote them both nice goodbye letters, wished them well, as I did whenever we had a resignation. Because you don't want to be too territorial about your congregation, and you don't want to leave with a lot of hard feelings.
Mhm. So it was not controversial.
Not particularly. I had already done that in my congregation in Galveston before. So I had a pretty good idea how I was going to proceed and how everybody would respond.
Mhm. So, getting back to the time when we did receive that endowment, that really gave us the opportunity to do more programming. And I know that you talked to the Shaws and they agreed to have a scholar in residence program. And
Yes.
yeah, so that became
Yeah.
a really important program that we had practically every year. I mean,
Yes.
I think every year while you were there and almost every year afterwards.
Well, I remember that was the last time I was at Ohev Sholom,
That's
was
right. You were
when
one of
I
our,
was the
yeah,
Shaw
yeah,
Scholar.
yeah.
But there, we did have some terrific people.
Uh-huh.
I remember when Danny Siegel came,
Hmm.
and Danny was just here in Houston this past weekend. We had a USY reunion from our region, from all of us baby boomers who were in it back in the day. And Danny had worked for many years with USY Israel Pilgrimage, and he was once upon a distant time was national president of USY. So it he and I remember we had Rabbi Reuven Hammer from
Yeah,
Israel,
yeah.
and you're lucky if you can get a scholar like him to
Mhm.
come and teach. He was really a major figure in our movement, and I thought he was pretty well received.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, I
We
can't
had some
remember all of the people
we
who
had
came.
some Melton teachers because Zohar Raviv and Johnny Blackman, I think, were both Melton people who came in. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, they were remarkable teachers for the weekend. Um, I remember, and I think this is while you were our rabbi. We had locally, we had Carla Klausner. That may have been during Rabbi White. If
That probably was during Rabbi White.
Yeah, okay. But we had, and that weekend created the program of Cafe Ohev.
Yes.
So then Cafe Ohev became a program in itself.
Yes. I had sort of been pushing for that for a while. And the people who came on Sunday morning, generally speaking, you know, they were uh, reluctant to make a big deal out of it. I mean, if they would have loved to have had new people come in and do exactly what they were doing. But when you tried to change the nature of it so that it would be more attractive, there was a little bit of pushback when we started doing that. But eventually it took on.
It was a little bit different from solely a Jewish focus. It was social, just social topics that interested us, living in the community, living in
Yeah,
this.
it was just, an attraction to do something interesting,
Uh,
to educate, to uh, talk about community issues, and to bring more people in.
yeah. Well, people loved it. You know, I think it remained very popular, continued, continued after you left. These are the programs that stayed there, that, you initiated them, and
Yes.
we kept them going because they were such good programs.
And they
So,
were popular.
yeah,
People wanted it to continue. So, the hard part was getting it started.
yeah, always, always. Did you initiate the Sukkot program of Pizza in the Hut?
I'm not sure if that goes back, but the thing that I remember most about Sukkot was that one of the things I realized when I came there was not a lot of people had Sukkot. Okay, so the first year, or maybe it was the second year that I borrowed Bob Cuman's Polaroid camera, and I went to every household that had a sukkah, and we put those pictures up on a bulletin board that we had outside the synagogue, so that when people came for Yizkor on Shmini Atzeret, when people came with kids for Simchat Torah, they saw this bulletin board with Chag Sameach from the Sukkot of Ohev Sholom. Well, over the years, that led to more people building Sukkot. So that was very gratifying.
Well, and did that lead to a sukkah crawl?
Oh, probably. I don't. I remember at least one
Yeah.
that I was part of.
Uh-huh.
So
Well,
but you have to have a certain number of Sukkot in order
right.
to make a sukkah crawl.
Now, all these programs, of course, involve food. So food has always been central to OHEV. The kitchen.
Yes, we're a very good eating congregation. We were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And breakfast
One of the
club.
things I've discovered is that a lot of other congregations are like that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Breakfast Club was an old program. I mean, that existed way before you came, but
Yes,
it continued, as long as we were.
yes, yes. But, and this was one of the things that I remember from my time, was when Harry Lerner created a big Kiddush fund.
Uh-huh.
Now, I had actually known Harry. I'd met him before I came to Kansas City. Why? Because his brother was a member of my congregation in Galveston.
Okay.
His brother was a judge and was president of the congregation while I was there. So I'd met Harry for, something in the family that was happening. And so we got to be very friendly, and he understood very, I think instinctively, that would be a really good thing if we had a serious Kiddush where people could sit down, eat, visit for half an hour, maybe more. Then we added a Talmud class afterwards. So some people stayed longer. The longer you keep people talking to each other, and with the more time they spend within the congregation, the more attached they will be to it, and the more they will do for the congregation.
Yeah, there was always an issue of, it's a lot of work to make a Kiddush. And from time to time, the people who did the work said it's too much work. But there was always tremendous pushback. We can't give up. We can't give it up. We can't give it up. So people.
I remember hearing a little of that.
Yeah, a little rumbling.
But I think in the long run, certainly the leadership of the congregation and the majority of the workers understood that it was really to the benefit of the congregation as a whole. People spend a lot more time in the building, and they got more attached to it.
For sure. There was one big celebration relating to the building. That was the mortgage burning.
Yes.
And I think there was, there may have been a play, and some of our members, it was like Mary Birnbaum, maybe Joey Tenenbaum, I think Donna Oberstein, they were dancing on the stage, they were doing some kind
Yeah,
of,
ask Ace about that. He would remember more,
Yeah.
I would guess.
There were a couple of rituals that you initiated that have stayed with us. So one was approaching the ark during Nila.
Hmm.
And we continued to do that, and we brought that custom with us to Beth Sholom. And I think Beth Sholom, we did it last year, but it was our first time as a joint congregation. I think they said, oh, we do that. But when the time came for Nila, a majority of the people who walked up to the ark were the Ohev Shalom people, because we were used to doing it. That was our custom that,
Yes.
dated back to our years when you were our rabbi. So it was a very
Yeah.
sweet custom, to a very sweet memory we had. And the
Well,
other,
I have to tell you, it took hold at Ohev
uh-huh,
in the minyan where I am now and where I still officiate on high holidays. It's never really taken hold. Maybe I still mention it every year, but maybe 2-3 people out of over 100 will come up to the bima. Maybe. Yeah, it was different.
yeah, different energy, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
The other ritual that you initiated was you encouraged us all to either wear white or to get kittles for the high
Yes.
holidays, for Yom Kippur. And so there are still a group of us who have our kittles from those years, and we wear them religiously every Yom Kippur.
Well chosen word, yes.
Yes. So
yeah. And that was a little bit later on, I think. That was probably at least halfway through my term at Ohev that I encouraged that.
Yeah.
And yeah, because Ohev was much more participatory on the average.
We did have
we always had a lot of people who were not going to do that kind of thing. Who were just, it was a little too much for many people, but a lot of people were open to trying things and to participating in that way. And so it became very personal for a lot of folks.
There was also your teaching trope, and I know that that's generally something offered at every synagogue all the time, but there were people who took you up on it, learned trope, and even though we could always rely on you to read the entire parasha every week, some of us could take a little bite of it because we had learned trope from you.
Yeah. And of course, I remember 2 people in particular who did a lot of Torah reading, sometimes when I was away, sometimes when I wasn't away. And that was Charles Shikroon, who really had an extraordinary impact on the congregation, and Larry Maldo, Oliver Sholom.
There's another program that occurred during your time, and that was when we had the scribe come for the writing of a Torah.
Eric Ray.
Yes.
Dr. Ray.
Yeah.
He died, I think, a year or 2 after he came to us. But he was such a wonderful teacher, and he had been referred to me by all kinds of people. So he was just great.
Well, it was a good project for the congregation. It was a lovely way to bring people together, and was meaningful to see, to actually do the writing, and there was a learning component. I think that he went to the Truman Library with people.
Yes.
So Yeah, that was an experience that well, we kept it alive because we had the a cabinet with the a replica of a Torah in there and
Hmm.
people's names in there. So we always remember that that was a lovely project that occurred, and
Yes,
good participation.
yes. And we needed it.
Yeah.
Um, we needed another Sefer Torah. So it was educational, uh, it was fundraising, and it was also community building.
Uh-huh.
And all of those things were important, and all of those things were big components of this project. And yeah, I'm glad it worked out so successfully.
What stands out maybe as like really strong memories of those the good years at Ohev.
Oh, I would say, yeah, the 16 good years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would say the Beit Midrash classes that we started,
Mhm.
the evening programs. Um, you know, I didn't think that people would commit to more than a 6-week class. So that's basically how we did a fall session and we did a spring session. And we brought in local people. I remember one of the first years, Rabbi Margulies came and taught a class. And, I'm sure there are some people who would not have come to, who would dafka not have come to a class by Rabbi Margulies. But for the people who came, it was super. And most of those classes went very well. A lot of it, what I taught in those classes was stuff that I was working through in my doctoral program. So, I was excited about teaching stuff that I had just learned. And so maybe I had a little more enthusiasm for that than I would have otherwise. But it was never a huge program, but it was well received. And when I look at what happens in the congregation where I'm working now, which is a congregation 3 times the size of Beth Shalom, okay? And that's after they join with you. So 3 times the size of that, and the number of people who come to adult classes is, probably about the same number as came to our Beit Midrash classes. Some congregations just don't have that culture, and we didn't have that culture initially, but we developed it. You know? And also, I think, people like you, Audrey, you came to the congregation after I came, and some of your enthusiasm helped to build that up too.
Well, thank you. Um,
And others who came who didn't start out.
I think there
People
was
like
a
Connie,
cadre. Yeah,
Vicky.
there was a cadre of people who really wanted to learn and were interested, and and that did make it a special place. I mean, Ohev for Joel and Barb and I, we all have our experiences and
Sure.
and they're different experiences. So
I want to mention one other program that we had, which, looking back on it, it might not seem like a big deal, but at the time, I think it was very important and very effective. And that was when we did a weekend for the 30th yahrzeit of Rabbi Miller.
oh,
There was a lot of stuff that must have happened at that time. When we were, I guess this was 95 or 96, but it was the 30th yahrzeit. And because of the nature of his death, which was very sudden, I think a lot of people had never really processed that. And I think that contributed to some of the problems that plagued Ohev over the years afterwards.
Let me
But
ask you.
that weekend was so important
Yeah.
for so many people, even some people that hadn't known Rabbi Miller, but who maybe sensed that there was a little bit of a cloud that was still hanging over. And I think we took that away. We helped people process something that had been really a traumatic event for the congregation. And we processed it a little bit, and that was good.
Yeah. So if I can ask a question, Audrey. So
Please.
when you look back at Ohev, how would you describe it?
Well, there were wonderful people, all in all. But I think, Joel, it was a process sort of trying to build a mission for the congregation. I think, and all the people who were involved on the executive board right at the beginning. And I think a lot of those people were there mainly because they hated the other congregations. And I mean, that's a number of them told me exactly that. I said, okay, that's not really a positive for the congregation that we have, but I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you're working with it. And gradually we'll figure out what the mission of this synagogue is going to be. And we did. And we, it also, I know that the period around Rabbi Fitzerman's time was a little bit traumatic for the congregation and certainly for some of the people who were like you in the leadership corps. So, it took a while just to kind of calm things down so that we could focus. And I think, it was really after the mortgage burning that not only were we more financially stable, but we were able to focus on, what this place is all about. And I think, we were very successful at that.
Well, I think that we look back on the years when you were a rabbi, with a lot of warm feelings, because there was so much that I think that you gave to us and that stayed with us. It wasn't just, something that happened and then disappeared, but it really affected us. And so if I haven't ever said this to you before, I want to say thank you. Thank you for what you gave to us during those 18 years.
Well,
Yeah,
I appreciate that. And I feel like we did some good work there. It was a long process. When I came to Ohev Sholom, before you were there, Audrey, we had like 20 people on Shabbat morning. People didn't realize yet that the late Friday night service was dying.
Yeah.
I mean, it was already dying. It was dying everywhere, not just at Ohev Sholom. Okay. But I knew that it wasn't going to last forever and that we had to build a Shabbat morning crowd. And it took years. We went from about 20 people on Shabbat morning when I first came there. And what did we have in 2004? 50 or 60?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, people don't realize, but that's enormous progress, even though it took a long time to build, to triple the number of people who come to synagogue on Shabbat morning. And it's not just me, it's a tribute to all the people who got involved and who had an impact and who brought other friends in and other new people. By the way.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time tonight. I mean, if there's anything else you'd like to add, please feel free. But I think we've really, gone through topics that we wanted to hit on. And you've corrected some of the notes I had taken on that timeline. So I'm really glad I had the chance to talk to you tonight and get my dates straight and get a little bit more detail. But it's good to see you, and it's good to catch up with you a bit.
We interviewed Rabbi Scott White in person on June 15th, 2023. Rabbi Scott served as our rabbi from 2005 through 2019. He recalls the entire process of introducing instrumental music to the congregation and enjoys seeing it live on as Shir LaShabbat today. He recalls feeling great satisfaction at seeing the congregation implement signature programs like Kosher Fest and sees Ohev Sholom as having been a model in the community for volunteerism. He considers the most fulfilling part of his work to be in personal relationships when he could support congregants at times of joy, sorrow, grief, or crisis. Rabbi White hopes that the strengths of the congregation continue on in its new consolidated format. Good morning, Rabbi White. I'm so glad you could meet with Joel and me today so we could talk a little bit about Ohev and your experiences that you want to share with us about the congregation. Thought maybe we'd start with just recalling, what were the years that you were there, and just lay that out for us.
Okay, I became full-time after a part-time year in the summer of 2005, and I retired the summer of 2019.
And before you were full-time, we in the congregation knew you because you did some part-time.
Right, in that year before, which was between rabbis, I did the high holidays and the pilgrimage festivals for the congregation, rabbinic.
And Joel reminded me that you were most remembered, probably were the number one candidate for the position because you had the outstanding Purim costume when we had our celebration at the synagogue.
Well, that's as it should be.
Yes. and I will say that you were consistent in that for all those years. Your Purim costumes were always, a great matter of what will he be wearing this year.
I knew that would be the case, so
Yes.
I put a lot of effort and thought into it.
Good. I think there's many ways in which congregants remember you during those years. Many people had very important relationships with you, where you were there for counseling in crises. You were there for people who were going through, different kind of challenges.
Right.
And also for bringing, at last, music into our Shabbat services. And I thought, well, maybe you want to talk about any of those or all of those.
Let me start with the music.
Sure.
Because in typical Ohev fashion, we processed it very methodically and very thoughtfully through the governments. And I remember that we had a pilot program for 6 months
Yes.
where we had the Shir LaShabbat once a month.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of the 6 months, the worship committee met to revisit the notion, how it had been going, and it was unanimous that we would continue. So it became an institutional part of our structure, as it remains in the newly consolidated congregation. So I'm very pleased about that.
Since I was part of the governance, I remember well that this was not an easy matter for the whole congregation to accept. There were some people
Right.
who didn't want music, and so it was a very deliberate process to reach a decision about having that. But now that it's part of a regular piece of what we did and continue to do in the new consolidated state, it's become so much a signature of that congregation that we have that special Shir LaShabbat service.
Truly, and Tefilatenu is very much the same model.
Uh-huh.
The liturgical lineup varies a little bit between the two,
Uh-huh.
but the music is, for all intents and purposes, the same.
Uh-huh.
So, sometimes down to the musical setting of the prayers that we use. So really twice a month now, because the Shir LaShabbat across from Ohev and Tefilatenu within the consolidated Beth Sholom, and we have both that are very well attended. And I noticed lately, and I said this to Sivia,
Uh-huh.
maybe it was a couple of months ago, the previous Shir LaShabbat 2 months back, that I'm noticing more and more people are singing, and there's more participation that I'm hearing
Uh-huh.
from the front among the performers.
And
Which
people,
is- yeah.
people come up to me afterwards and just say how much they enjoy that service.
That's nice to hear.
So it's, yeah.
Very nice to hear.
We had the occasion to talk to Rabbi Horowitz the other night.
Oh, how's he doing?
He's doing quite well,
Great.
and he on his own brought up the fact of music.
Hmm.
And he said, I was never opposed halakhically to music. He said, I just didn't have, it wasn't something that I could take on. He said, but Rabbi White had the skill set to take that on, so I thought it was great to know that you were going forward on that path.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate to have congregants who have the musical skills as well
Uh-huh.
that have come forward, not only for the musical accompaniment and the singing, but for the organization as well.
Yeah.
And we have rehearsals, and obviously the publicity has to go out with who the lineup is and what we're going to be doing. You know, communicating among the performers, so we're ready.
It's
time, yeah.
it's really a program that has your signature on it.
Thank you.
So yeah, we thank you because it has outlived your tenure
Thank you.
and goes on with us as the congregants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me just address the first part of the
Yes,
question, which
yeah.
was the relationships that I had. And,
Yes.
the how can I put it? Sort of facilitating is a term that I've used in the past. Either the grief or the joy, and it was a role that I always enjoyed. Although no one looks forward to having grief in the congregation, I thought that was an important role for me to be able to play to set the right tone, give people guidance in fraught situations as to how the ritual can help them to process it, either celebrating or commemorating.
Mhm.
And so that was very fulfilling.
Yeah.
I think the most fulfilling part of my rabbinate.
I was going to ask you what exactly that question, so I'm glad you got to it. And besides the grief and joy, there were crises that people were going through that I think they called upon you for.
Right. Yeah, I can remember a few of those. That's
Yeah.
right. That's some late night visits to hospitals, and sometimes it was the psychiatric unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are really challenging.
Well, apparently, you provided help because the family shared with me that there was a lot of comfort from your visit. So
Thank you.
As-
It's really nice. You just made my day.
yeah, well,
Nice to hear.
yeah, I think it's important to know because the congregation, we don't always let you know all the things that we did experience and appreciate. What would you say were some highlights? Are there any special sweet spots, like sweet experiences of like, this is just so nice the way Ohev does it? This is a very self-serving
Well,
question.
I mean, the first thing that comes to
Yeah.
mind was kosher fest.
Okay.
You know, because and Hamantashen, the community events where we had not only volunteerism, but we had our large core group relative to the size of the congregation that just put in untold hours of sweat equity and thought, in consideration on how to build the program, and then we got to have the satisfaction of being the little shul that could on a sunny June afternoon in our parking lot, having hundreds and hundreds of people come through and get to enjoy the day. And Joel, you can remember there were many occasions where we had interested non-Jewish people in the sanctuary to hear about Judaism and learn about the congregation. I thought those were extraordinary events to have, several dozen people in the sanctuary and being able to tell them, maybe people who knew very little about Judaism, who drove by the congregation, maybe on their way to work every day for years and just knew that it was an interesting looking building, and they got to come inside and enjoy it and ask a lot of questions, and I got to orient them a little bit. So that was fun. Overall, those events really, I think, were emblematic of what the congregation was capable of.
And Rabbi, you may recall the time that you and I went and gave the tour,
Yeah.
and that was the time, I love this story, when we were wearing the t-shirts that Michael and Audrey donated, and on the back it had King Louis.
Right.
And you were asked the question, what is the significance of King Louis in Judaism?
Right. I remember that. And I also remember an occasion where someone asked, I don't know if you were there at the moment, where do we do the sacrificial offering?
Yeah.
Good question, but 2,000 years late.
Yeah, yeah. So good. We did disseminate some information to dispel misinformation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, we were ahead of our time.
Right. There were a lot of little small groups that we had at Ohev. We had the Breakfast Club, and I know that was a special clique of people who you had friendships with, relationships with.
Right.
Did that was that something that you saw as a significant piece of the synagogue? It was a small group, but
That's right. That's right. Sometimes we were only 6 or 8 on a Sunday morning at the table, and so yeah, I mean that was important. First of all, it was continuity from a time when there were probably 5 times that, and we were blessed with people like Shirley Penner and Charles, who would come in and make us these wonderful breakfasts, and we'd have a chance to connect with one another after Sunday morning services. So yeah, I mean, even something on a smaller scale like that was a part of our culture that had its own momentum because there were people who were committed to it. I mean, the minyan in general, the morning minyan in general, I would put in the same category as Kosher Fest as being something that we really, really did an extraordinary job with. And of course, you have to give a lot of credit to Marvin Denton for making all those phone calls over however many decades.
Now, did you go out to breakfast after Minyan? Was that part of?
I did. Once or twice a week, we had a regular group that for a long time with Sandy Hipsch of blessed memory, who was a big fan of Village Inn over off of Metcalf and Johnson Drive. So we used to go there, I think it was Tuesdays. And then we had a group that also would go to First Watch at Corinth. And so, yeah, it was fun to participate in that.
There were other groups. Let's see. You had Beit Midrash that you kept going ongoing, and I know anything about Zionism and Israeli history of Israel. That was something that I know you love to teach, and
one of my abiding interests remains so.
Yeah, and it showed in your teaching. So it was always good to be in that class with you.
Thank you.
I'm also thinking about other programs like we continued with the Cafe Ohev that had started with Rabbi Horowitz.
Right.
And I think you helped us get some speakers because we
Indeed.
were looking for people who would, it wasn't necessarily religious. It could be it was usually secular.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about some of those people who you helped bring in?
Okay, I remember Dan Margulies coming in and giving a very interesting talk. I don't remember about what. It's funny. It may have been, he has so many varied interests. He may have been talking about his experience at the crossword puzzle tournament. That's the kind of thing Dan does.
Right.
Eric Morgenstern, raised in the congregation, but no longer involved, came and talked about just a healthy lifestyle. He had lost a lot of weight and was talking about how he did that and how others can benefit from some of the things that he did.
Were you there when Chuck Haddock?
Yes, I brought Chuck in. My
I thought
neighbor
you
right
brought
up the
him
street.
in. Okay.
Yeah, Chuck came in. He had just composed a book about Charlie Parker. And so he came in with his wares and talked about it. And I remember we had audio set up, and he actually introduced famous pieces that Charlie Parker played and talked about them, and then he signed his books, sold the books. So yeah, we did.
Yeah. And then in addition to Cafe Ohev, we had the Scholar in Residence program.
Right, the Shaw Scholars.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember who some of those scholars were during the time you were there. We may have brought in some Melton teachers then.
Yes, I believe. I don't remember his name. He came twice.
Zohar Raviv.
Zohar Raviv. Yes, excellent.
Yeah, he was excellent.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We had Edwin Black. Talk about the Farhud, which was the riots against the Jews in Arab communities that led to their mass migration to Israel in its early days.
And Mr. Black who wrote the book about IBM.
That's Edwin Black.
Edwin Black.
Yeah, right. I remember he had sort of a 3-prong because he's an author of diverse interests and subjects.
Uh-huh,
Yeah, he talked about the Farhud, he talked about IBM.
Yes.
We read the book to
Yes.
prepare about that. And
Yeah.
I think he talked about the status of the West Bank in international law,
Uh-huh.
making a case that Israel is not in violation.
Yeah. And Carla Klausner was there.
Carla came and talked about the Jews in the Middle East, in particular Turkish Jews, right?
Yeah, and Rabbi Mandel.
Yep, who had been at the Vatican to do research and met the Pope, right?
I used to feel like we had high caliber programming for a little congregation that we were we
Yeah,
were
I
able to
concur.
do some things. Do you have a sense of Ohev's place in the Kansas City Jewish community? Was it? Do you think it's no longer a standalone congregation? So while it was there, did it have anything special that it offered to the community? Or
It's a great question, which I have to think about for a moment. The answer is definitely yes, and I would say it's more than one thing. People noticed, going back to Kosher Fest, Jews in the know, community active Jews, knew how we're a modest congregation of modest means, of modest numbers. Yet we pulled off these really impressive programs, right? Because we had such a high level, I know I'm repeating myself, high level of volunteerism. And to have people who would remark to me, who came from much larger congregations, how unique it was that we were able to accomplish what we did with the meager numbers and the means that we had. And so I think not only was that noticed, hopefully it provided some inspiration. And one of the things I'm hoping in the consolidated congregation is that our volunteeristic spirit will fuse into the larger consolidated congregation. I always liked the fact that we had so many people who stepped forward time and again. I mean, that kitchen was always in action with these wonderful kiddushs. They didn't make themselves, and we didn't hire caterers. So the consolidated congregation, in my perception, for better or for worse, has not necessarily had that approach. And I know we have, since the consolidation, some of our volunteeristic people are regularly at Beth Sholom. And so I hope that culture will influence, our culture will influence the larger congregation. And we'll have the benefits that come from that because it's fulfilling.
One of the aspects that I am aware of with the Ohev congregation is that people were, it was close-knit. We were a small group, and whether we were friends, whether we liked each other, didn't matter. We were family. And so we came forward for each other, for Shiva Minyans, for Simchas, for, being in the kitchen whenever help was needed.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember the first time Kosher Fest occurred, I think Mary Birnbaum must have said something like, everybody has to volunteer unless you're in a nursing home. And that's about how it was. Everybody did volunteer.
Truly. Yeah, and even some of our members who weren't necessarily part of the quote-unquote regular crowd, I think someone like Susan Ehrenberg, who's just a lovely person. When it was Hamantasha time or Kosher Fest time, she was there, every day of the preparations. So it was the specialized mitzvah that even our non-regulars got involved with.
We're doing this taping for the memorabilia room, which we hope to have as a place not only to see something of the Ohev history, but also as a place where we have speaker programs so that, the whole congregation comes and can see the surroundings and know that here's a piece of the congregational history, congregation as a whole.
Right.
I'm wondering if you're in this unique position because you are both our rabbi and you are an active member of the new congregation. And so you're seeing the Ohev congregant, because a good many of us are now at the new consolidated congregation. You're seeing us in the new place. And do you have any advice to
help us become stronger, more integrated as these two groups have come together. It's been short of 1 month short of a year, and we're on a path of integrating. It's not a
Right.
instantaneous process.
And again, a very good question. Some advice. Let me start with this while I'm thinking about whether I have a piece of advice, which is in response to your observation about my, wearing a different hat now, having a little bit of a different identity, pardon me, within the congregation. So I want to tell you something with the context of Sylvia and me. Because as you guys know, Sylvia just finished her first year as the religious school director, the education director at the Consolidated Congregation. And so now she's the Jewish professional and I'm the Rebbitzin when we're there. So I that's been kind of amusing, at least theoretically for me. And I enjoy the change. I enjoy the change going from being a producer of Yiddishkeit per se to being a consumer. Like the congregants, I've always enjoyed being. I mean, even when I was the rabbi, I didn't sit up on the pulpit unless it was the high holidays. I was in the congregation, so I've always liked. And early on when we started, that was kind of the theme of my transition into becoming the rabbi of the congregation, because I had been years before a congregant, and I still identified as a member of the congregation sitting in the pews. So anyway, but to answer your question as far as advice would go, I think finding the right balance between going all in, I belong to Beth Sholom, and all of its history and culture now becomes mine. It's like the mystical notion that we're all at Mount Sinai, so we're all at Beth Sholom. On the one hand, being all in as active members of Beth Sholom, but at the same time, not losing our identity, at least in the generation, our generation. 20 years from now, maybe not so much.
Are we like in the desert
But
now, Bobby?
I think so. I think it's what you're doing is very important for us to continue to identify with our history, okay, and not to lose sight of that, and to cherish that. And in some ways, it happened naturally. Using as an example the Kiddush on Saturday mornings, because even though we're integrated and it's not cliquish per se, it still tends to be the case that the Ohev people sit down at the tables, because we're all friends and family, and continue to schmooze while we're eating the way we did when we were at 75th and Mall. So just finding a way to keep that balance so that 20 years from now, Ohev is not completely forgotten. It's not just a matter of an artifact of the congregation that's associated with the space in Beth Sholom, the artifacts that are there, the records like what we're creating, but so we also keep that identity that people will know about 20, 25 years from now, when the memories are more distant, because people like us will probably be at Village Shalom services instead of Beth Shalom in 20 years.
That's right.
Right. So I just think I think keeping that balance, keeping our awareness of where we came from, at the same time as being very enthusiastically involved in the Consolidated Congregation, and having kind of that dual identity would be my advice. That we try to do both. I think it can be done. I think we're doing it now. But I think if we set up the infrastructure in terms of people's mentality and attitude, and actually what we have to offer as a Consolidated Congregation, which includes the fact that there's a second congregation within it, the next generation and then the generation after that will have a keen sense of the fact that it's one congregation, but it has a rich history, and the rich history of the congregation that consolidated into the physical plant and into the name of Beth Shalom is still a live and breathing entity within the congregation, the larger congregation. So.
Thank you for that answer. Joel, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess looking back at your tenure, looking back at your history, because you knew Ohev before you became the rabbi.
I did.
So maybe just a moment, kind of how you learned about Ohev, went to Ohev, and then your thoughts about Ohev.
Okay, so Ohev was the closest geographically to the home that I grew up in, 75th and Mall, and I grew up at 82nd and row,
Mhm.
under a mile by foot.
Mhm.
And so, as a strictly practical matter, when I came home from my junior year abroad in Israel, and I had become a traditional Jew who didn't ride on Shabbos, it was like process of elimination. And the congregation just accepted me, what can I say, wholeheartedly.
What year was
And
that?
that would have been the summer of 1978 is when I returned from Israel. Rabbi Joe Schoenwald, Rabbi David Lidke were the clergy. They were young men, both around 30 at the time. I was 21. And so they and the congregation, and the two of them lived on the route to walk from my parents' home to the congregation. So I would literally stop on Shabbos morning at the home and walk with them. And often it meant on the way home, stopping for a bite to eat at one of those places. But the congregation at large, some of the same people that are still very active now in their mid and upper 80s, I remember from that time almost 50 years ago, and how warm it was for me to be there. So
That's a long history.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's 45 years. You can believe that. It goes by in a flash.
And how would you describe Ohev?
The word that comes to mind for me is tenacity. Okay, because even before my time as a spiritual leader, knowing the history of occasions when there were challenges that, for example, the paying off the mortgage, and having a ceremony for that, whenever it seemed like there were threats to the existence of the congregation, we made it through. I mean, the consolidation process was something that, as you all know, it was attempted in 2009. And I know there were probably occasions before that. There was
at
some
least.
overture with KI.
Yeah.
But we found, whether or not they worked out, it wasn't like what happened. If it didn't work out, it wasn't like, well, we'll just decide, we'll close our doors and people can go where they want. We had the tenacity to re-establish, regain our footing independently and move forward in a very creative and productive way. So
Yeah, and this time when we did have our talks with Sholom, the dynamics were entirely different. So
Right.
it was a positive effort on both sides going forward.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference.
So the only other thing that I could say is that from a very personal standpoint, as someone who grew up here in Kansas City and has a lot of friends in history there, it was very fortunate for me to have Ohev close to my parents' home when I came back a religious Jew at 21 years old, and to have Ohev here as a prospect for me to serve a significant portion of my rabbinical career, more than half of, 3/4 of my career as a congregational rabbi, because there were 10 years or so where I was, a teacher and not in the formal rabbinate, congregational rabbinate per se. Pardon me. So just for me, very personally, incredibly grateful that the congregation was there for me to be a part of in the ways that I was and continue to be.
I remember we had a final celebration when you were retiring. It was really a wonderful event. It was a big brunch.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that was the design that you wanted. You wanted
that message.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote that message into my remarks. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it was just great to be a part of the family and to kind of gently. I always enjoyed working behind the scenes. If we had something in the sanctuary and we brought up special speakers and the soundboard, and I would notice that it needed to be the frequencies. The soundboard needed to be reconfigured. I always enjoyed being able to go up there and do those little things.
See, these are the things we don't know.
Right, absolutely. To make things work. I always liked behind the scenes. I enjoyed being out front and speaking as well, saying my say. But working behind the scenes was always very satisfying too. Even if it meant helping out in the kitchen a little bit, which we all did, and I was always glad to do as a full-fledged member of the congregation on an equal basis as everybody else. And
now I know you had frustrations. With governance from time to time.
That's to be expected. Yeah.
And even when you came on board, there were people who left. But as I understand from Rabbi Horowitz. He said, this happens every time a new rabbi comes in, and the new rabbi should never take it personally. It's just how it is that people need to people need to leave.
That's
Yeah.
that's an accurate and helpful
Yeah.
perspective. It's nice that he said that. It's
Yeah.
true, and it's also good to hear.
Yeah.
And I think everybody ended up landing on their feet
Mhm.
elsewhere.
Mhm.
So all's well that ends well, as they say.
I think did you institute the Pizza in the Hut program? For
It was under my tenure, but I think it may have been Sally Gordon.
Okay, but we
for her
definitely wanted.
grandkids. Yeah,
We would have really celebrate Sukkot by having lunch during the week during Chol Hamoed.
right.
Yeah.
You know, I always loved our courtyard.
Uh-huh.
Kind of a funny little shaped space.
Uh-huh.
But I just thought it was, when we were out there for Shavuot in the spring and Sukkot in the fall with nice weather, it was just a great place to be. Going up those stairs into the sukkah and making kiddush, and then coming down and having the tables there in the courtyard.
Yeah.
It's just a lovely, intimate experience for 50 or 60 people. I really enjoyed that. And I mean, the best thing about the congregation overall, I think, was always the food that came out of the kitchen. It's just, listen, I mean, that's how I got to traditional Judaism. Rabbi and Rebbitzin Solomon, and that junior year abroad, lived in the neighborhood. And, you know, going over there and enjoying her culinary creations. And we had so many good, similar meals at Ohev. It's like an army that marches on its stomach. The congregation did the same.
We did. We had wonderful Shabbat dinners, and we had wonderful morning kiddushes. It became harder and harder as time went on because that crew became older and older.
Starting to age out. Aren't we all?
As we all are. Yeah. So, but it's you know, for many of us, that's a very sweet memory.
Absolutely.
Schmoozing with food and just having connections with one another.
Absolutely. As we continue to do in the consolidated congregation with a few other new friends.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for what you gave us as our pulpit rabbi for all those years.
It was
On
my
behalf
pleasure.
of not just me, but I think I speak for many of us. And thank you for this morning and for giving thoughtful answers to some of these questions so that it helps us preserve a history that we consider precious. We interviewed Rabbi Baruch Pador on June 8, 2023. Rabbi Pador served from August 2019 until the time of our consolidation on July 1st, 2022. Rabbi Pador recalls with great affection her love for our congregation. She describes her beginning months, then the transition to Zoom services due to COVID. This shutdown affected how our synagogue operated, and Rabbi Pador recalls how she worked to keep the congregation together through Zoom services and educational, social, and family programming. Rabbi Pador, I'm so glad that we were able to find time so that we could talk this evening. So welcome to an evening discussion where I hope you have an opportunity to just reflect and share some memories that you have for the period when you were at Ohev. And as I had mentioned to you before we just began recording, I'm recalling that you started in 2019 at Ohev, and it was in August. Would that have been the month?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, so you had a very short period of time until it became COVID shut down.
Correct.
And there was so much that was peculiar about that COVID era. But I wondered if you could share some memories you have, something that you will hold dear in your heart about the time you spent with the Ohev community.
So thank you for the question. There are many things that I hold very dear. First of all, I was a member of the congregation. So I got to know the congregants I think I moved back here in 2012. And I had that time for a couple of years before I took a position elsewhere that, you know, I got to know the community and I got to know Ohev. And so I felt very comfortable there from the very beginning. And then, as you said, I started August 1st of 2019, followed immediately by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, which was joyous and wonderful. And when Yom Kippur was over, Mike Silverman came up to me and said that I was everything that they had hoped, meaning Ohev, hoped that I would be. And it meant so much to me to have somebody say that to me, because I love Ohev. I felt very connected to the community there and to the families, and we started family programming. Some of my really joyous moments were Friday night Shabbat with families that we did, and for the holidays, the family programming with all the children. And I loved when the children came to services and would run around. That was wonderful to see that. And
As I'm recalling, there was quite a challenge when you began, because we had many deaths and there were funerals that you had to do several in a row, which must have been exhausting.
I believe I have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and intertwined with that and continuing for the 6 months, there were 12 deaths.
Oh my.
So
Yeah.
I barely, and sometimes didn't even finish one when there was another. And it was tragic and sad, but also I formed really strong bonds with those families during those 6 months, and still have many really intimate, strong relationships with those people from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you said, we were supposed to have my installation, and the day that we were going to order the chicken, we had to stop the order because we thought we were closing for 2 weeks. And of course, it was closer to 2 years. So I learned how to use Zoom, and we continued to have services, and people attended, including the high holidays. So grateful for Zoom and to be able to continue with the community in that way. But there were many plans that I had to have outreach to the community and invite more people and hopefully increase the membership, that I wasn't able to, nor was Ohev able to put into place because of COVID.
It was remarkable, though, with how we held together as a congregation community during that time. And I know one of the activities that people really enjoyed was schmooze and booze.
Schmooze and booze was great.
Yeah.
So we did that on Saturday night for Havdalah, and I got my guitar out and we did Havdalah, and then we had a little something to drink, and mules, was that what it was called? Some people had a mule. I think it was Sally and her husband
Larry,
had, Larry had the I never heard of it before, but a mule, and it was in a special cup, and I think I just had wine. I'm not, I don't like to drink while I'm working, especially, and I don't drink in general, so wanted to stay with my wits. But it was nice. It was really nice, and the different people would come, and we would just have time to talk to each other. And I think it was one of the things that, some of the other things we did on Zoom was we had that progressive Sukkot, even on Zoom, where different people, I remember Rabbi White did a liquor tasting with different kinds of liquor, and I think the Allmeyers did something, and we each showed our sukkahs on the Zoom cameras in our background.
Didn't we have miniature, because I think I participated
We
in
did.
this, we created dioramas
Yes.
of a sukkah.
I think Sisterhood did that, as I
Oh,
recall.
okay, maybe it was Sister.
But yes, you had miniature Sukkot, and so we had that as well. And so I think we did the best we could to keep some of the traditions of Ohev. We just did them on Zoom.
I I was getting a lot of comments, receiving a lot of comments about how pleased people were with how the high holidays went smoothly on Zoom. And did you feel good about that?
So my biggest fear was that where I was living at the time, every day at 11:30, right when I'd be reading the mourner's Kaddish and the list, my Zoom would go out. So we got a special, and the computer I had didn't have an internal capabilities to hook it directly into the modem. So we got a special computer just for me to lead services that had the capability so I could hook it directly into the modem, and it wouldn't stop in the middle of services. So, but yes, you know, Anna and I we work very well together in general. And so, in fact, we started working on High Holidays my first year that summer, even before I was officially at Ohev. And, you know, we worked together to plan something that we thought would be meaningful and spiritual. And on Zoom, you can't go too long. I mean, people just, your attention span only lasts so long. So we did our best to create something that was spiritual and meaningful and would fit in the time that we thought people's attention would be okay on Zoom.
Quite an experience for all of us for
Yes.
the first time.
Yes, even the second time.
Yeah.
But at least we had a format to go by. The first time we really had to come up with a whole new format. So, and then making sure people had their machzorim so that they could, which, you know, people came into the parking lot and we gave them their machzorim, and as I recall, we gave them gift bags as well for the holidays.
And we had some members blow the shofar so people
Yes.
could hear the blowing of
Right.
the shofar.
Right, we did. So that was great.
And there was also morning minyan that continued.
Right, we continued with morning minyan on the days that we normally had morning minyan. And I still taught Talmud, as I recall, and we did different kinds of study, and I wrote, at first, before we actually were doing services on Zoom, there was a short period of time where we hadn't quite gone to a regular service on Shabbat, and I wrote a spiritual message in the bulletin that we sent out, so that there'd be something spiritual tied to the parasha, to the Torah, and to spirituality. So
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now when we transitioned back after it was okay to go back. It was a little bit hard to think that now it's okay, we can be back in the synagogue again.
even today, there are different people who still respond in different ways to the circumstances. And when we went back, we had morning minyan in the main sanctuary so that people could sit spread apart. And some people knew to do that, and some people didn't. And then we had Shabbat services, and we still were, you know, we were all still wearing masks, and that was a challenge. And then, you know, really by last summer when we consolidated, then most people took their masks off.
And that was another big change that you saw occurring, the whole planning of a consolidation.
Yes, so I'm glad that I was there for this year to be supportive to not only the Ohev members. I've been so pleasantly, so pleased that so many of the Beth Sholom members have had so many kind things to say to me directly and to thank me for being there. So I'm happy to be there, and I'm glad that other people were happy that I have been there as well.
And I understand that you have quite a few people coming to your learners minyan.
So the Learner's Minion started out with 15 people, and there's anywhere from, it depends, like the weekend, if there's something else going on, then it diminishes. So, but usually around 10 people, give or take, a few people. And this will be our last Learner's Minion this coming weekend, this coming Shabbat. And we've managed to go all the way from Birchot HaShachar, Pesukei de Zimra, Shachari, the Torah service, the Amidah for Shabbat, and the Amidah for Yom Tov, for holidays, announcing the new month, the Torah reading, the Haftorah reading, the blessings, and we actually used 2 books, 2 Sidurim, to look at the service. So I'd have everyone pick up a Lev Shalom and a Blue Seam Shalom, and we would look at the service in both of them, and also the differences. It's so interesting to me that there are 2 couplets of blessings for Birchot HaShachar right in the beginning, the morning blessings, where the verses are reversed. And so if I'm leading out of Lev Shalom, then people who, which I do, then people who are in the Sim Shalom are probably looking at it, and so I've been able to explain that to the people in the Learner's Minion who are trying to become more familiar with the service of Beth Shalom.
I know that one of the programs that's near and dear to you is Shir LaShabbat. And that started with, I think Rabbi White started.
Correct.
Rabbi White started it, but you continued it. And what is it about Shir LaShabbat that makes it, that really draws you to it so much?
I love the music and the singing and the joy. It's meant to be a joyous service. And that's what Anna and I have tried to make it. And I always say my favorite psalm is Psalm 150, because it doesn't tell you what to say. It tells you how to pray. And it tells you to pray with cymbals and tambourines and drums and stringed instruments and the shofar and all kinds of musical instruments, and with your whole neshama, your whole neshama, your whole breath and your whole soul, everything that you are physically and everything that you are, your neshama, inside too, your spirituality, that this is how you pray. And for me, that's what Shir LaShabbat is. It's a way to, on Shabbat, express our joy being together as a community, and to praise God and do it with abundant joy, with our souls and our voices and our spirituality, and as a community together. It's wonderful.
And one aspect of it is that we maintain the religious service format.
Correct.
So it's not just a sing-along.
No, it's taking the prayers that we have on a regular Shabbat and raising the level of spirituality through music and song. But it is our basic traditional service. And we still have the full Torah reading, and it's a full service. It's not a truncated service, really. It's a full service. We don't have a sermon, but I always create a theme. So last week the theme came from the part of the Torah portion which had the priestly blessing. And we started out by saying, who can be blessed? What does it mean to be blessed? Who is blessed and how are you blessed? And we began with that question, but also looked through the liturgy as we went through the service to talk about the different blessings that are there and what they mean to us as a congregation and as individuals.
Well, it was a lovely service last week. I know that there was a lot of enthusiasm, which is what we want to have for the joy of Shabbat. There's something else I recall that you brought to the Shabbat morning services pre-COVID, and that was to communicate the joy and sweetness of reading the Torah?
I love, first of all, personally, I love reading Torah, and we're blessed to have you, Audrey, and David, and Rabbi White, and Adam Miller, and I'm sure there's others that I'm not mentioning, but we have wonderful Torah readers, and it's just it's been great to have so many people participate, and for me to be able to
Well, you had a
participate
particular
as well.
innovation where you walked around during the Hakafot.
Oh yes, pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID,
That's right.
pre-COVID,
Now,
yeah.
so I did it during weekday services as well as on Shabbat, and I handed out candy, and that was everybody's favorite part.
Yes, it
And
was.
people had their favorite candy that
Yes.
they would.
You even
pick.
had sugar-free.
So I had sugar-free candy. I had, Melanie Allmeyer's father loved the pineapple, so I always made sure when I got to him, I had pineapple in my hand, the pineapple one to give him, so he didn't have to look for it. And some people liked the chocolate. I had chocolate, and it was, in fact, to sweeten the sound of Torah, and because Torah is supposed to be sweet in your mouth. So
I think we all love that custom.
that was great.
Yeah.
But good. I liked handing it out, and people loved getting it. So
Well, it was a short time. Those years went by quickly. You were there from 2019 through 2022, and then we had that consolidation. So it's been a different structure entirely this past year. But through 2023, that's 4 years with, Ohev, the Ohev community.
right.
And I hope that there's some good friendships and relationships that will be with you always, and some good memories of Ohev as we're doing the memorabilia room, which is where we want this video to go. There's so much that we want to hold on to and remember that we cherish about a very long-standing congregation that is no longer standing alone, but part of a larger one. So I want to just thank you so much for your
Well, I did
your
want to
service.
say that one
Yes.
of the things I think is so special about the Ohev community is the warm, wonderful relationships that people have. And it wasn't just a community, it was a family. And when you walked in there, you could feel the warmth and the friendships and the wonderful spirituality from the whole congregation. And I am blessed to have been there for these 3 years just at Ohev, but to continue to be the rabbi for the congregation during this past year. And I hope into the future that they're wonderful, warm, loving people, kind, generous people. And I think that that's the outstanding part of Ohev is the wonderful congregants.
Thank you. Thank you for what you've given to us.
Well, and thank you for everything you've given to me. It's been great.